everybody.
Yeah.
I know it's kind of chilly, so
No.
half the brain doesn't, work because it's too cold. And now it's warmed up room, so when you go in, it's contrast, so it's not going to work. So now we are in our overview of the Bible, and what a miracle! We made it to New Testament. Yay! So just for you to kind of a small reminder. Next Sunday, we are not going to have Bible study, but we will have something special. I will do the pancakes. So I decided to be a CEO pancake maker, which is Christmas and Easter only. So we will have I will turn it into a tradition. So on the Christmas day, whenever we have Sunday, if it falls on Sunday, and Easter, we'll have pancakes between the services. So come over, we'll have fun. We'll have a blast, for sure.
Will it be between services?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what time are we supposed to be here?
Yeah, same 9:15, 9:30, something like that. Yeah.
Okay.
So right after service, I'll be there, So it will be cool. And I think you got an email, so there will be no Bible study on January 1st. I don't think it's correct. That's when we'll have Mark and so on and so forth. So we'll keep going. Now, we are in Matthew. As you can see in your handouts, there are a couple things that we need to talk about. First of all, it is one of the well-structured books. And it has kind of like an obvious structure. You want one? And it has a deeper structure. So the current scholarship, almost every commentary that you pick up, they will talk about 5 discourses of Matthew. That means 5 long sermons that Jesus delivers in the Gospel of Matthew, and you have them. Okay, so you have kind of like a narrative. You have stories that lead to, and then you have discourse 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And the pieces between them are somewhat what is chiastically ordered. Just one more time, for those of you who cannot memorize this magic word, Anybody into Harry Potter? No? So the spells, wave the wand, and that chiastic structure is a magic word or like a spell for Zion. Okay, one more time. Chiastic.
What does chiastic mean?
Don't jump the gun. Okay, so when you have a either story or a phrase, when ands are talking about something similar, and it kind of goes toward the beginning, that's chiastic. Because if you have a line and you connect them, you connect the ends, and so that's your beginning, that's your end, that's the middle of the phrase. You have Greek letter chi. Okay, it's not chi, it's chi, like in chemistry. Okay, so since it's kind of like a crossword, shape structure, let me show it here. So when you see in the Gospel of Matthew, the first 4 chapters is a historical narrative of birth and early ministry, which is matched with the historical narrative of arrest, death, and resurrection of Jesus. Okay, so you have a historical narrative in one of the beginning, and it's a historical narrative of the end. Then, for example, B's. You have narratives of healing and cleansing, and B prime, historical narrative of healing, but it's healing of social brokenness. When you read those pieces of chapters 19 to 22, you will see that Jesus deals with divorce, with how to deal with social authorities, and how to deal with your enemies, and so on and so forth. Okay, to whom pay taxes, no taxes, this kind of cool stuff. And then C is a historical narrative of lordship over creation. That's where Jesus calms the storm. And then as a response, C prime, again we see his lordship over creation, but you have more a little bit different stories. That's where the feeding of 5,000 and so on and so forth. So that's why you have them, lined up this way. You see how these parallel blocks are connected. That's why B is a little bit more dent in and C is further dent in, so you can see those parallels. Important thing to talk about is what is in the Gospel of Matthew and what is, which is not repeated anywhere else. Okay, so as you know, so let me turn it. As you know, we have 3 synoptic Gospels. And the Gospel of John. Okay? What's synoptic means? Okay? Optic, everybody understand, that's to see. Okay? Soon in Greek means together. So that's the guys who look at the life of Jesus somewhat together. Okay? So that's Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Okay? If you compare them, how the narrative unfolds, it's very similar. Mark is the shortest one. We have Matthew, 28 chapters. We have Luke, 24 chapters. Okay, modern scholarship believes that there was something like, okay, I need to write it down. Q, source Q, nobody have know that, nobody have seen it. That comes from the German word Quelle. Okay, so it's sayings of Jesus. And then from Q, there was Mark, and then most likely from Mark, borrowing from here and here, we have Matthew and Luke. Okay, they missed, kind of looks fine. The only problem is, how can you identify the source that nobody have heard about, nobody have ever read, we do not have a single copy. Therefore, what they should have done is they should have added 2 more letters, to frame this kind of schematic. B on one side, and you can guess what should be on the other side, okay? So that's wrong. That's not what happened. What really happened is Matthew was the guy who was from Levitical tribe. He was a tax collector. Okay, everybody knows how Matthew was called. Okay, so that means, now think about that. The guy is from Levitical tribe, and he collects taxes for the Roman government. What does that mean? Okay, when we hear time after time that disciples of Jesus were illiterate guys, they were so uneducated, dumb and stupid, and that's why he had to struggle with them, and so on and so forth. That's totally wrong. Why? Because if you want to be a tax collector for Rome, that means you need to be able to communicate in Greek and Latin. Okay? That's pretty obvious. But being from Levitical tribe, that means he can read and probably know almost, if not by heart, almost by heart, Hebrew scriptures. And he can operate with the people in the land, and the main language in the land is Aramaic. So now think about that. If you know 4 languages, how dumb and stupid you are. I don't think so. It just doesn't work. So he was the guy around Jesus. Not Mark, maybe, but definitely not Luke. Luke comes after. Okay? So what I think happened is after they gather together, they have a day of Pentecost, they have spread of the church in Jerusalem, and then the persecution falls, they have to go out into other lands. He is the guy who was charged with an important idea. you have to write something for those guys who are expecting Jesus, okay, let me scratch it to make it more precise, who are expecting Messiah in the Mediterranean synagogues. That's why in Matthew, it's like a recurring phrase. It happened, that it was fulfilled of the prophet. Sometimes he says it's the prophet Isaiah. Sometimes he says it's the prophet Jeremiah. Sometimes he doesn't say what prophet it is. But he is really well versed in what we call Old Testament. Okay? That's why when you read the Bible, you do not begin with Matthew. You begin with Genesis. Especially Genesis 1 through 6. Okay? A few weeks ago I wrote down like 3 important passages that you might want to dig into, and then so you begin with the very beginning. That's why he has that. We can see the Gospel of Matthew is like a bridge between Jesus' story or expectations, and it's connecting where those expectations come. Okay? So, but there are a few things that exist only in the Gospel of Matthew. So we are not going to go through all of that. If that's what you take home, that's for you, because I'm not going to repeat myself. Because you can read it. I mean, even though I probably had some. Whatever, not important. What stories are nowhere else but in Matthew? Story number 1. The connection, so it's Matthew 1. The fulfillment of Isaiah 7 prophecy. Okay? The text that those of you who were at the first service, you already heard it. If those of you who will come to second service, you will hear it. Okay? The virgin shall conceive, shall bear a son, and he will be called Emmanuel. Okay? It's only in Matthew.
Okay.
Okay? And so we'll talk about those. I'm not going to list all of the things, but second important thing is, only in Matthew, in the course of the, what is that? Christmas story, okay, nativity narrative. Only in Matthew, in chapter 2, we have three what? Kings. Okay? Actually, Bible doesn't really say how many guys there was. Okay? We know there were 3 gifts. So 3 kings. First of all, they are not called kings. Secondly, we don't know the number. So when you pick up this Hallmark or whatever postcard you prefer, and you see three kings, usually it's lonely guys on the camels, in the desert, with their crowns, all dudes. I don't think that's how it looked like. For 2 reasons. The thing number 1, again, we do not have the number in the Bible. But what we know from the Bible, it was somewhat very hard to make sure to secure the safety of travelers from distant lands on the roads. Okay? That's why you want to make it to a town or a city to be behind the walls, because there was some kind of order, some sense of control within the walls. That's why 3 old dudes, unless they were some kind of kung fu pandas. So yeah, what I think is, I would assume even the older people you've seen the Aladdin probably with your kids or grandkids, the Disney stuff. Remember when Aladdin comes to town with a caravan of elephants and this and that and gifts and all of that kind of stuff? I think that's how it looked like. Because the reason I think that is it's not in the Bible. I have to make it clear. No, it's not in the Bible. But with no hesitations, those guys are invited into the palace of Herod. Okay? They are led right through. We want to talk to the king because we have some important news. Okay, cool. So if that's 3 dudes walking down through the desert, and they're their clothing is dusty, maybe turn off. Nobody would let them go, but if it's a whole caravan with a bunch of gifts, yep, right, so it makes sense. So I think that's how it was. And there were some guards and all of that kind of stuff.
And sheep.
Yeah, so one more important story. Matthew 16, the confession of Peter. We find it here. There are some parallel texts that kind of talks about possible confession, but the place where Peter clearly states, "You are the Son of the living God," and then Jesus responds, "On this your confession, you are Peter, but on your so it's a play on word, Peter, and in Greek it's Petra. I'm not going to write it in Greek because it doesn't make any sense. So you are Peter, you are the rock, you are the stronghold. On the stronghold of your confession I will build my church." Okay? So, and so on and so forth. There is one more important thing. At the very end, so at least 4 we need to pay attention to. At the very end, in Matthew 28, sometimes people think that Matthew 28, where Jesus says, all the authority is given to me, and go and make disciples, baptizing them and teaching them, is a pre-ascension phrase. It's not correct. The reason I'm saying that, he did say that, but we know from the context that the Matthew 28 happened in Galilee, okay? Which is about roughly 150 miles away from Jerusalem. And we know the ascension happened from another mountain, not from Galilee. It's also kind of like a hilly, mountain side. But ascension happened from the Mount of Olives, okay, next to Jerusalem. So because they were within sabbatical move between the ascension place and Jerusalem. So they came back to Jerusalem within the same day, stayed 10 days in Jerusalem, prayed, waiting for the Holy Spirit, and so on and so forth. So Matthew 28 is the only place, and we need to pay attention that he goes and tells, go and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them and teaching them. He tells it only to 11 disciples. Okay? So, 11 disciples means what? Who is missing?
Judas.
Judas. Why?
He's a bad guy.
Okay? He hanged himself. We know that. Sad story. But stuff happens. So we need to understand that he is still dealing with those guys that he appointed in the very beginning in chapter 9. So this reference to 11 disciples goes back to Matthew 9, where he 9 and 10, and where he gathers them together and then has another spiel, telling them, you go and then preach, and then they come back and so on and so forth. So making this a parallel, we need to understand that their expectation probably would be that this mission would be as successful as the previous one. Because they come back really joyful, really like shouting and very excited, even demons are obeying us, and it's really cool, So when we see that at the very end he sends them out, we know with what kind of heart they are going out and carrying on their mission. Yes?
So Matthew 28, we're talking the Great Commission. That's what we...
See, the term Great Commission is an free evangelical invention of 19th century. And it was actually connected to the company that brought financial support and influence to China in exchange for tea, basically. So it was a British Empire stuff It was their Great Commission to influence those nations where their merchants are. Now it's turned by Free Evangelical Church into something else. The person feels the call and goes goodness knows where, with no submission to the church and does crazy stuff.
So when Jesus said, "Go therefore make disciples of all nations," he was really just talking to the 11 disciples.
Yeah.
At that point.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for raising this question. Let us go. Matthew 28, I believe it's verse 16. Because that's where the paragraph begins. Now, verse 16. Yes, that's ESV. You're right, Jim. Now, the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain to which Jesus had directed them. And he speaks to them. Okay? That's why, in the case of emergency, we do have a procedure in our hymnal that a person can baptize somebody if they are on the brink of death. But that right doesn't stand on its own. After that, the person who did it should let the church know, and it should be, if the person is able, that the person who is baptized, let's say there was a very hard delivery and the baby is almost dying. We had that case. Our older son was baptized not in the church, he was baptized in the hospital on the 8th day because they had to do some crazy procedure, and we were like, no, we're not going to do it without him being baptized. So he was baptized, and then turns out that his health made such a turn that he didn't need that procedure. It's like, yay, cool. So when it's possible, the baptized person, the person who was baptized in emergency should be brought to the church. It should be announced to the church. And there is another rite of verifying the baptism. Okay? So, yes, it is possible. Usually the question stands as so a person cannot be saved without the baptism. What about the guy on the cross? If you want to make rules out of exceptions, you're going to end up in a very weird situation. Okay? So the rules are rules. We have the disciples who are called and ordained. That's why they deal with sacraments. Okay? Baptism, confession, absolution, and the Lord's Supper. So on and so forth. So that's what it is. So 11. I don't know. I would be very happy if everybody would do it. But the Bible says 11. Okay? So it doesn't mean that you cannot witness and testify your faith. No, it's not about that. But it's about the order in the church. That's why Paul actually goes into very lengthy, kind of wavy explanation. I think it's in the letter of Corinthians. That I don't remember that I baptized anybody. Maybe here and here. But I'm not really into that. Why? Because he did not consider him to be one of the 11. Okay? That's my take on that. Even though he was recognized as an apostle, he was kind of staying very careful with that. Okay? So, that's 4 important things that are very, how can I say, it's a features of Matthew. Also, if you can see the chart that flows from first page to the second page, in Matthew, Jesus is presented as new and a greater Moses. There are some events in his life that kind of recapitulates, that picks up on the life of Moses. For example, miraculous birth. So Jesus is born miraculously, and there is a danger associated with the birth, and we have it in Exodus 2 and in Matthew 1 and Matthew 2. There is commission to the ministry, there is teaching on the mountain, and we know that the Sermon on the Mountain can be paralleled to Exodus 20. And if you see how Sermon on the Mountain is structured, you have first 9 Beatitudes, and then he goes into those paragraphs of the law. I should have corrected myself. So it's Exodus 20 and then 21 to 23, and so on and so forth. What is very interesting, and I would say somewhat unfortunate, is when I was dealing with the hymns, with the parts which relates to the hymns, is we have a beautiful hymn and we will sing it today, O Come, Emmanuel. We have it in our hymnal, but We Three Kings is not in our hymnal. Neither in the current one, nor in the previous one, and nor in the blue one. Okay, everybody remember Lutheran worship, the blue one? And before that, there was kind of either red or blue, the Lutheran hymnal. I did not check that one, but for some reason in the last two, we do not have We Three Kings, which is again, O Come, Emmanuel is based on this one, on the first story. And We Three Kings is based, it's Epiphany story, and it's based on Matthew 2. So that's the thing.
Why isn't it in the Bible? In the hymnal?
Not in the hymnal? I don't know. I can
Somebody didn't
ask.
put it
You can write a letter to the Commission on Worship and just ask them.
Sure.
I don't know what they will say. Like, we have few interesting things. Like in Amazing Grace, they omitted second stanza.
Really?
Just removed it. Because the second stanza goes, "'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace that fear relieved." Okay, so their idea was that grace, they equaled grace with gospel. Therefore, since gospel cannot produce fear, it's not a biblical stanza. And I was like, not necessarily. Great. I mean, the presence of the law that brings a sinner to repentance is a gracious presence. Why do I say that? Because in Romans chapter 1, let's go there. It's an important thing to understand. That the presence of the law is also a gracious presence. God, with His grace, touches someone with the law. Why? Because if He would not be that graceful, what would happen is Romans 1 situation, and I think it's verse 23. Give me a second. This is not my Bible, unfortunately. No, 26. The verse 26 kind of explains it, but if we will begin, 24 and 26, whatever, 24 and 26. Let's begin with 18. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of man, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. Okay? What is a suppression of truth? Verse 19. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. Okay, so they know there is a God, they know there are truthful statements, and yet they suppress it. For the invisible attributes, namely His eternal power, His divine nature, has been clearly perceived, even since the creation of the world, in the things that have been made, so they have no excuse. For, although they knew God, they did not honor Him as God or give thanks to Him. Okay? But they became futile in their thinking, and the foolish heart were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools, and exchanged the glory of a mortal God for images resembling mortal man and birds and animals and creeping things. Now verse 24, very scary one. Therefore, God gave them up in the lust of their hearts. So if the person does not feel even a single slight accusation of law, what it might mean is God gave it up. Okay? You wanted this awful, ugly, sinful life? Okay. Enjoy it. I'm dealing with someone else. And then it's repeated in verse 26, for this reason God gave them up to dishonorable passions and so on and so forth. Okay, and then it goes that women actually, so whatever. You can read it at home. So the fact that there is a law is a sign of grace. Of course, that we do not stop at the law, we continue with the gospel. Okay, so that's speaking of our hymnal. I mean, I still like our hymnal, but some things can be done better. So hopefully next one will be even better. Okay, questions or comments?